Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second in our series of the Citizens Assemble Jam webinars. I'm Jess. I'm the Events and Program Manager for Global Game Jam. We are about 2 weeks into our Partner Jam collaboration with the One World or None team. This jam aims to raise awareness about citizens' assemblies and promote a deeper understanding of this innovative democratic model. This is, again, the second of our series that dive deep into the topic of citizens' assemblies, providing resources and context to the participants. Citizens Assemble kicked off on June 6th and runs through August. It's open to creators of all backgrounds. The jam will also have a $10,000 prize for the top game, amongst prizes for additional categories, and the potential for further development for standout submissions. The jam will run across 2 phases. We're currently in phase 1, with teams creating prototypes in the first 2 weeks, and then iterating concepts based on feedback in phase 2. So by June 23rd, we'd love to see your first prototypes if you're looking to get feedback for the month of July. Final submissions will be judged on a variety of categories, including best overall, best gameplay, and citizens vote. Today, I will have Miriam Levin joining us along with Tristan Clark. Miriam is the Director of Participatory Programs at Demos, focusing on how to make democracy work better for people. She was the Chief Executive of Engage Britain until their merger with Demos, and prior to that, she was Engage Britain's Program Director and led their people-powered policy-making work on health and care, which knitted deliberative and participatory methods together to build policy from the grassroots up. She's also worked for the UK government as head of community action, where she led the government's first deliberative democracy program and was head of outreach at English Heritage. Her postgraduate studies have taken in several disciplines from archaeology to museology, regeneration to urban design, some of which she still uses. Clearly very, very impressive resume. I'm very honored to be having her here today. So if I can just have Miriam and Tristan on stage, that would be fantastic. Hello, hi. Hello. How are you guys today? Good.
We're in a heat wave right now.
Heat wave.
It's great.
Yes. Yeah. It is also hot where I am, and it's kind of like unexpectedly hot, but hopefully it'll taper off very soon. But Miriam, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. We really appreciate you joining us. And yeah, I mean, if we want to just get right into it, I'd love to bring your presentation on here. Awesome.
Perfect. Now, question is whether I can control it my side.
You can. You should be able to. It's from streaming from your computer. So.
Oh, that's so clever. Okay, which is fine. I don't need to move it on just yet anyway. So that's perfect.
Awesome.
Shall I kick off?
Yeah, let's go.
Or is Tristan kicking off? Apologies.
It's all yours, Miriam. Go for it.
Okay. Amazing. Well, first, thank you so much for having me here to talk about Citizens Assemblies. I think I've got about 20 odd minutes to talk about them. I could talk about them for hours, so you can like stop me anytime and get very overexcited about these things because I think they're brilliant. And second of all, I'm not a game designer. I don't play games. Like, that world is totally new and exciting for me. So if you've got questions about that, I'm not going to be any use at all, but I'm really, really happy to answer any questions people have on Citizens Assemblies. And I'm very aware that I can talk about this stuff, A, for hours, and B, in potentially too much technical detail. So if there's questions, absolutely delighted to hear them, and I can stop and roll back and like go over the stuff again if it's not clear.
Yeah, absolutely. If anybody has any questions, if you're watching live, please just drop them into the chat and we'll be able to get to them.
Perfect. So I thought it would be helpful just to start off by thinking a little bit about not specifically why Citizens Assemblies, but why this sort of tool, why we're trying to find tools that make democracy work better, which ultimately is what a citizen assembly does. So I thought it might be helpful just to talk about that, kind of the world we're in at the moment, because that kind of sets us up for why these tools are so amazing and exciting. So the way I think about it at the moment, and I'm guessing people on this call are from not the UK, or might be the UK, but potentially other places in the world. I think I saw in the chat somebody's in from Canada. So really interesting context. I'm talking about the UK within a global context. And basically the way it looks to me and to Demos, which is a think tank, the way we're considering things at the moment, we're basically in a democratic emergency. Like, things have been getting worse and worse for some time, but we are really in a crisis point for democracy at the moment. There are authoritarian leaders now in America, in bits of Central and Eastern Europe. There are kind of trends which are happening now, which feel they're kind of snowballing, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And really, we've hit a crisis moment for democracy. It is not working for people, and people are going, well, it's not working for me. There's this other alternative out there, which is like to vote for a populist leader. Yeah, okay, let's give that a shot then, because the status quo isn't working for people, which makes sense, because it isn't. The status quo, democratic status quo, the way elections work, don't really work super well. Like, people often feel like their own vote doesn't really count for very much, and more to the point, our systems don't. Certainly in the UK, people aren't better off than they used to be. They aren't better off than their parents. It's still really hard to get doctor appointments. Schools aren't doing so well. There's lots of things going wrong, and it feels like our democratic system, the bit that kind of governs all of the stuff that we live within, it's not working super well for people. So it's not surprising that they're kind of losing faith in democracy as a way of governing. I don't know how people on the call feel, and obviously I can't see anybody, so I can't ask you to raise your hand, but I'd love you to think about this question about whether you trust politicians to make decisions in the best interests of the country. And by the country, whatever country you're in, I'd love you to think about that for a second. Think whether you would say that, yes, I do trust politicians to make the best possible decisions for the country and for myself. And if you do think that, I admire your optimism, because most people don't think that. We've done polling, and again, it's just the UK, but we polled people in the UK, and 76% of people don't think politicians make decisions in the best interests of the country. And that's really scary, because that's how our country is run. We have elected representatives, and we do empower them to make all the decisions kind of about how our country works. And most people, over 3/4 of people, don't think that system works. So that's kind of like a setup, which is like, it's all quite bad. But then the question is, so what do we do about it? What's the step forward from that? Because one step forward is, well, people are just going to go vote for a whole load of authoritarian populist leaders, and then we're a bit screwed. So if it's not that as the option, what's the way of making democracy work better, so people really feel like they have a stake and agency and power in the decisions that affect their lives? Because that's what governments, local and national, are doing all the time. They're making decisions around taxation, around immigration, around healthcare, around education policy. They're making these decisions all the time on our behalfs. How do we enable people to kind of have a role in those decisions that affect our lives? Because we're the ones who have to kind of deal with the outfall and the consequences of it. So we think about that in terms of, well, elections are one way of, like, using a democratic power. You get to vote, and I love voting. I get really overexcited by going into the ballot box and putting my X in a box and voting. I love the power of that, but also I know it had very little power, very little shape and influence to shape things. So what we think about is like, okay, so how can you be involved in democracy between elections? The decisions that, once a government's been voted in, all the decisions they make kind of along the way. And that's where citizens' assemblies come in, because they are a really, really brilliant tool for giving ordinary citizens a voice over these really hard, really interesting decisions and policies that affect how our world works, how our country works, how our lives are going to work. So I'm going to talk through kind of what they are, but I hope that's kind of set it up a little bit. It's like, there is a crisis, but here's a tool. Here's a thing that we can use to make things work better for people. So let me talk through what they are, because I feel like I'm just talking about this notional thing that nobody knows what they are. So I'm just going to scroll on to the next slide. 1 second. I do that. There we go. I've got to come back to you. So essentially, citizens' assemblies are a way of bringing together ordinary citizens, ordinary people like you, like me, who are not in the rooms where decisions are made. We're not in those rooms of power. We're not there, usually. But it's a way of giving people a chance to be part of those difficult and big decisions. It's not everybody. It's not every single person in the country is going to be in a citizens' assembly and have a chance to do it. But what it is a randomly selected but representative group of citizens. And what that means is randomly selected means anyone could be picked to be part of the process, but the people you have in the room to take part in a citizens' assembly, let's assume it's about 100 people, because a national one is usually about 100 people, they are representative of all the demographic of the population that it's covering. So that means they're representative by age, by gender, by ethnicity, by geography, like where in the country you come from, potentially by political view. What did they vote in the last election, or did they vote or didn't they vote? What are their attitudes to the particular thing that's being discussed? And as long as you know that information, like you know how many people of different genders are within the main population, you just mirror that in miniature in the room. So if there's 49% of the population are male and 51% of the population are female, in the room of those 100 people, 49 will be men, 51 will be women. So you basically create what's called a mini public. So you have a miniature version of the whole society in a room. And the power of that is that it brings together people who have a huge diversity of experience and skills and knowledge and background and culture and stuff they bring with them, because they are from all these different demographics. And it's people who wouldn't usually take part in anything like this. They aren't the people, like I say, who are sitting in the rooms of power making the decisions. They're just ordinary folk like you and me, people from all walks of life. They're in the room and they get some power in that room. And that's really, really rare and exciting. What's also brilliant about them is that because you've got people from all different backgrounds and cultures and demographics, people are meeting people from all those different backgrounds who they wouldn't usually meet. And I don't know about you guys, but I am in a very comfortable liberal left-wing bubble in North London. So I have most of my friends pretty much agree with my politics, and we pretty much agree that, when things are going right or wrong. I don't often find myself, apart from through work, kind of in environments with people who have really, really different views, let alone have a really, really polite and respectful conversation with them. There's a lot of shouting on social media. So this is an opportunity for people to come together to really talk to people who are very different to them, who hold different views in a really safe and respectful environment, really understand each other. And there's a huge amount of power in that, because it doesn't happen very often. And it's really, really brilliant and beautiful when it happens. So you've got, let's say, 100 randomly selected but representative citizens in a room. It might be a physical room, it might be an online room. They can happen in person or online. Yeah, pluses and minuses to both of them. And what they are tasked with doing is they are given a big question, a really difficult, knotty, potentially very polarizing and difficult issue, and they are asked to sort of essentially find their way through this very, very difficult question to come up with recommendations about how that thing should be dealt with. It might be on climate change, it might be on immigration, it might be on taxation, it could be on any given topic. If they are commissioned, when they are commissioned, they're usually commissioned by central or local governments. They're kind of given a question, go, right, what do we need to do in order to make this thing better? And they are taken through a process by which they are, first they share their own views on it, because everybody comes into the room with thoughts, experiences, opinions, and it's about sharing that and having a chance to kind of say where they're coming from. And then there's a really big learning phase, and that's really, really, really critical, because this is about giving people an opportunity to talk about something, but with knowledge and with information and with really robust, independently checked and rigorous knowledge, like information and experts who basically say, right, you don't know anything about taxation. Nobody knows anything about taxation. It's really complicated. Let me tell you how it works. Let me give you some information so you've got all the information you need to be able to then really robustly discuss how we need to go forward. And having done processes like these on incredibly complex and technical topics, I know that you can take people through any complex and technical topic and they'll get an understanding. You just got to give people explain it really clearly, really simply, and people will get it. It's all completely understandable. People's knowledge ratchets up until they've got more than enough information to be able to have a very, very robust conversation about how to tackle that problem. So a really critical part of a citizen assembly is like, you've got the people in the room, they've got their question that they've been tasked with answering. They learn a lot from experts and Q&As with people, and sometimes they've got more questions than the experts can answer. So different experts are brought in to answer their questions, and then they have time and space to discuss. And if they're coming up with recommendations, it's about not just coming up with a wish list of all the perfect things that you could imagine in the world to, sweetness and light and unicorns and rainbows. Actually, they're tasked with, you've got a real world problem, you've got real world parameters, there's a real world budget here, and there's particular legality that we lines that we can't cross. So what do we do within those parameters? And their job is to work through the trade-offs, that if you want X, that's going to affect Y. Well, that's not going to work. So we're going to have to think about another way around it to make sure that what people come up with are really sensible, not just sensible, but they're practical and they can be implemented. So they are really sensible solutions that any government or any commissioner could pick them up and go, yeah, okay then. Yeah, we could do that because it fits with the real world and it's ideas we hadn't come up with already. And we know people are going to get behind it because they come up with the ideas. So we know it's going to be workable and popular because it's not come from us politicians, it's come from the people who are most affected by this thing. And that in itself has a lot of weight and a lot of power, and it is very exciting that's what people do. And having been involved in running quite a lot of these things kind of in the past, what is truly amazing and wonderful to me is that people are really decent, really sensible, and really respectful. In an environment that is set up to be a safe and respected space, people go with it. And yes, there are extreme views are heard, because there are people with extreme views out there, and that is absolutely fine, and they have to be heard. They are part of the conversation. But it's usually their peers, are the citizens who moderate it and just go, yeah, thanks, we heard you, but also, no, thank you. We're really good. We could all agree that this kind of place in the center here, we all agree on this. This really works for the majority of people. It really works. Yeah, okay, this we can get behind. Thank you for sharing your really dodgy extreme view, but that's not what we all agree on. We're all going to go here. So there is a brilliant self-moderation of groups where people treat each other very respectfully and can have a really difficult conversation about potentially really, really hard things, but work it through in a really, really, really productive way. The point ultimately is to come up with recommendations. So it's like an answer to this difficult question that is being posed that can be handed then on to government, central government, local government. And the power, but the risk of citizens' assemblies, and it is worth saying this, is that they are, as a tool, brilliant, but only as powerful as the organisation that wields it. So if central government is going to commission a citizen assembly and they say, right, you are empowered to come up with recommendations on how we create a fair, humane and enforceable immigration system, for instance, this is what I'm thinking quite a lot about at the moment, that's great. The citizens will do their work because they do, that's how it works. They kind of given time and space and they come up with recommendations that to create your immigration system, you have to do these things. That tool has no power if government then doesn't actually go, yep, thank you, we will do something with this. Yes, we will respond to it and then we will enact it. So it is worth putting that caveat on that these tools are fantastic, but only as good as they are kind of as the final outcome, which is then government does something with the results, because otherwise people feel like, well, but that was an amazing, empowering, fantastic, powerful experience I've just been through. I feel really empowered. Oh, wait, you didn't do anything with it. Right. I now trust you even less than I did before. And I already didn't have a great amount of faith in government because people tend not to. So it's a caveat that it's worth remembering that these things can be the most powerful and beautiful tool I have ever come across in all the work I've done on democracy, but they need to be listened to by the people who have the power, because ultimately this is a power sharing tool. It's a way of enabling people to have power in a system that doesn't usually give them any voice at all. What else did I want to tell you? Only to make the point that it's kind of, I'm sure most people here on social media, right? It's pretty nasty, it's pretty toxic, it's pretty polarizing, or it can be. Imagine the opposite of that. This is about creating a safe, respectful, conversational space where it's not headlines, it's not shouty. It's like you can hear the shouty stuff that's there, but then you dig deep, and actually what people do is, regardless of the opinion they come into that room with, by the end they can think beyond their personal need to the common good, and that kind of finding the place of the common good is where it gets like properly exciting. So I'm just going to move this on a bit. Actually, no, before I move on, I think it's probably useful if I give an example, because it's at the bottom of this slide. So the poster child of citizens' assemblies that all of us who are who run these things, we often talk about the Irish Citizens Assembly on abortion, because it's just a really fantastic kind of powerful case study. Essentially, Ireland so the Citizens Assembly on abortion was held in 2016, I think. And prior to 2016, abortion was illegal in Ireland. And not only was it illegal, but it was basically impossible for politicians to even talk about it, because it was, as a Catholic country and a very strong church and very strong traditions, it was basically impossible to have a reasoned and reasonable conversation about abortion. It had just been against the law. Abortion was legal for as long as people remember. So politicians just ducked the issue, even though there was growing public sentiment that maybe this needed to change. There was no politician that would touch that issue with a barge pole, because whatever happened, they were going to get it in the neck, and politicians generally aren't super brave, so they weren't going to touch it. But this idea came forward that perhaps what they could do is take it out of politicians' hands and take it off their plate and go, well, why don't we put you aside for a minute and actually just allow citizens to have a really robust conversation about this. So they set up the Irish Citizens Assembly on abortion, and they brought together 99 members of the public, and over many, many weekends, over about 6 months, the participants heard a huge amount of information from experts and testimony from people who had been through it and people who hadn't been through it, and from all different perspectives. And in that room, not only did they have they matched the demographics of Ireland, but also they knew they'd polled the country on their attitudes towards abortion. And so the number of people who were pro, on the fence and against legalizing abortion, and they brought that demographic mix was in the room as well. So what everybody knew is that this room represents Ireland in a microcosm. Having discussed this over 6 months, they came finally to the final recommendation, and they recommended ending the constitutional ban on abortion. And the government took that recommendation, held a referendum on it, because you have to in order to change the constitution, and as a result, legalized abortion. And in terms of citizens having the power to have changed something so big and so potentially toxic and divisive as a conversation about abortion in Ireland in 2016, 17, if it can happen there, you can do it on anything, anywhere. So that it's an incredibly powerful example of when a citizen assembly has been used. Now, the last thing that I wanted to say was just to talk a little bit about, just to go over the why this stuff is important. So essentially, why do it? Because you come up with better answers than when you just leave it in a party political world. Because people, while they might have political views and opinions, tend to think beyond party politics, definitely think beyond party politics towards the common good. It's a way of getting through a really divisive or toxic issue, like abortion, like immigration, which is in the UK, one of the most divisive and difficult and polarizing issues that we're facing at the moment. It's about, it allows you to overcome a politically stuck problem. So something like abortion, where the government was just like, we're just not even looking, we're not going to talk about it, we're not going to tackle it. This allows you to go, do you know what? We'll put you aside for 1 second. Let's let the citizens have a go and see what they come up with, and that'll help you make your decision really well. And that's about building greater legitimacy for solutions. So if the recommendations have come from the people who are most affected, that's a pretty good case for doing that thing, because people who are on the sharp end of these problems, they kind of know what the problem is and what to do about it, but they're very, very, very rarely given the chance to kind of have their say in it. And lastly, it's about building trust again. So where I started in this, which was people really don't trust politics, politicians, political institutions, this is a way of going, you know what? It's a way of building back some of that trust, because if the government really is listening to people and acting on what people want, people representing people, not just the loudest voices at the edges, that's really, really positive for kind of our countries and for democracy in the long run. I think I shall stop there. And I'm very, very happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you so much, Miriam. That was fantastic. We do have a few questions in the chat that have come up, and I'm happy to also ask a few of my own questions. But I will start with from the audience. So we have the question, do you have any examples from history of a broken government system being fixed holistically by non-violent means like this? That's a weighted question.
The whole government system being fixed by non-violent means.
Maybe not yet, but
no, but that is because Citizens Assemblies have a history that dates back thousands of years, because they actually come from ancient Greece. But their recent iteration is only a few decades old. And I think the places which are not in a functioning democracy at the moment, they're not holding citizens' assemblies. So they're not really a tool that is going to be used by the government, because if they are not a democratic government, they're certainly not going to do this, which is like a democracy plus. So no, not yet. But what I would hope to see is the point at which you are getting rid of an authoritarian regime and building a democracy, that if you're going to build a democracy from the grassroots, you do it using these tools that really empower people. You're not just kind of putting back in place power structures that ultimately disempower most people.
Exactly. Kind of in a similar vein on that topic, there's the question of that. Well, the comment is that they love the idea of assemblies tackling individual issues, but have they been introduced in the United States yet?
They have been used in the United States, but they have been on state level. So,
okay.
Oh, I'm totally going to forget the bit of the states where they have been used quite a lot. Certainly not on the national level that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I mean, it would be very interesting to see the results of that specifically in the United States, for sure. Another question on a different note, what kind of things have you seen gone wrong at assemblies?
So the biggest thing that can go wrong is if the commissioning body doesn't respect and then respond to and enact what comes out of the Citizens Assembly. That's, to me, the worst thing that can possibly happen. Other things that go wrong when the question that's been set isn't well thought through or constructed, or when the real world parameters haven't been given to the citizens who are in the assembly to be able to work with. Because actually what you don't want to come up with is like a pointless wish list that can't ever be enacted. You need it to be like solid and enactable. And once and only once have I had to kick somebody out of a process because they were really, really, really offensive and very rude to my member of staff. It's like, and there's a line. Holding those conversations is really hard. And one of the points on the slide that I didn't mention, but sorry, it is critical, is like really good facilitation. And that's the one time I had to kick somebody out.
Yeah, because it does run the risk of obviously very high emotions depending on what the topic is going to be. Is there a set time for citizens assemblies, or because I know with juries it can take as long as they need to come to a decision? Do citizens assemblies work in the same way, or is there a set time that ideally you have some kind of consensus by X date that you're working towards?
So by convention, a citizen assembly is usually about, well, a minimum of about 4 days. Some run much longer than that. So the Irish Assembly on the Irish Assembly on Abortion, I think they had eight full days, I think that's what I remember. And then we've run processes that are not full citizens assemblies. They're a series of deliberative workshops, which are much shorter, and we do those over 5 2-hour sessions. So, but they aren't the full citizen assembly. Really, you want about 4 days to really get under the skin of a difficult problem, and enable people to get past their own, not past their own opinion, but be like, everyone has their own opinion, but to really listen to what other people have got to say. And actually, the power, what's really amazing is when people come in with a particular view, and by listening to a lot of people and learning more about it, their view shifts. And not many of us do that. Once we've got a view, usually it's pretty settled, and most people don't listen enough to hear a different point of view to maybe think, well, actually, that's a really good point. That's actually changed my mind. So that's powerful.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about demos, and specifically what your role is there, what demos is, if you don't mind going into that a little bit more.
For sure. So we're a think tank, and what that means is that we essentially research different topics and different issues and come up with policy recommendations for central and mostly central government, but also we work with local governments. It's basically about how can we help the world work better for people. And when I say the world, actually I mean the UK, because we're UK based. So we have kind of 4 different strands of work. One around public services. I can't remember what they are now. One around public services, one around inclusive economy, one around tech, AI and democracy, and one about building a more collaborative democracy, and that's the bit that I run. And yeah, essentially we do research on issues that really matter to people, and we try and work with people to understand what they want and need out of it, so we can make recommendations that are based on what people want and need kind of back into government.
Perfect. Cody from the chat asks, commenting saying that they are very interested to learn about the permanent assemblies that have been established. Could you speak more about those instances?
Yeah, there's a few places in the world where citizen assemblies have been institutionalized, so they form part of the government, and that's like amazing and super exciting. So the most famous of those cases is in East Belgium. It's the German-speaking part of Belgium, which is particularly small bit, so it's not a huge amount of territory, but they have their own government, and they basically have instituted a process by which they have, you've got your elected representatives. They have set up what do they call it? I think they call it a citizens panel, which is set up like a citizen assembly. So it's maybe 100, 150 people, representative of the wider population. And their job is to decide what are the topics that really matter to people that need to go through a citizens assembly. So that panel is a permanent thing, and people rotate in and out after I think about 1.5 years. And they commission, empower citizens assemblies on the topics that really matter. So they've done one on food security, they've done one on climate, they've done about 2 or 3 others. And then the recommendations of the citizens assembly go to the citizens panel, and they go straight to the government. And the government, by law, has to respond to them, has to listen, which is kind of that's not sadly not normal for the rest of the country, for the rest of the world, but that is really exciting. They also have permanent assembly in Paris, which amongst its many jobs has done quite a lot of work around participatory budgeting, which means they have a budget to spend, and they really listen to people about how that budget should be spent on things that people across communities in Paris want to see. And there is a permanent citizens assembly on climate in Brussels as well, which is constantly looking at what needs to happen and change within kind of the city region in terms of mitigating the effects of climate change.
So would you say that they represent the model that needs to be spread around the world, or something like that, like a bunch of permanent assemblies set up with something in law saying that they must be acted upon? And then what would have to be true to actually make that happen and spread around the world? Big question. But
Totally different politicians than the ones we have now, probably. Yes, that would be incredible. So I don't know how many people like on this call are from the UK, but we have the House of Commons, which is elected politicians, and we have the House of Lords, which is people from basically who are peers. They're peers of the state, which basically means they have all manner of titles and they get to sit as a result of their expertise or other slightly more nefarious means, end up in the House of Lords. And sometimes they are hereditary peers and sometimes they are the senior leadership of the church. What would be amazing would be and a House of Citizens, because you have imagine that if you had like 3 tiers rather than 2. So, or indeed, you could even replace the House of Lords with the House of Citizens. That would be even better, if you ask me. So you have your elected representatives, that's fine. They are making the decisions. That's how our system works. But imagine if they could actually really hear from 100 people who represent the demography of the country to really go, no, what we really think is important. You over there are having this whole conversation in Parliament about X, Y, Z, but what really matters to us is this. You need to be talking about this. And this is what we have come to the conclusion. We've done a huge amount of work and conversation, and where we think you need to go is this. And that's what kind of then feeds into the decision making of the House of Commons. So something that like is like a check and balance on politicians, I think would be super exciting.
And how do we get there?
Well, I think when someone or some party or some people have power, it's very, very hard to give it up. So you have to be prepared to understand that power is not a zero-sum game. You have to know that by sharing power doesn't mean you have any less. It just means that you are empowering people to do more and that they can help you make the really, really hard decisions you're going to have to make. Because you've got to make, I mean, this government, I'd hate to be in government. You've got to make really hard decisions, right? You've got to put taxes up. You've got to spend money on defense, which I would massively... Anyway, there's a whole question about that. But you've got to make hard decisions. Why wouldn't you do it with people who can help you? Who can really tell you, your voters, your constituents, the people who you are ultimately working for, which is us, the citizens, like, we can help with this. So basically, you need politicians who are prepared to listen and have the humility to go, we don't know all the answers. This is going to be really difficult. We'd rather do it with people rather than to them.
I could probably keep asking the chain of, and how do you get those politicians in on? But I know we have the questions as well.
We do have a few other questions. I'd love to ask this one. I think this one's really interesting and also quite important. So Eric asks, it's a bit of a long question, but so in many places, it's increasingly difficult for immigrants to get formal citizenship, in part because of long histories of colonialism, racism. Non-citizen residents are a growing share of the population and workforce in many countries, but they're often shut out of other voting in other democratic processes, even though they are highly vulnerable to harmful state decisions. So how could we include our neighbors who don't have formal citizenship in Citizens Assembly? Do you need to be a citizen, I'm assuming, to be part of the assembly? That's how they can track you and be able to reach out to you to participate.
So actually, no, you don't. We use citizen in its really, really broad term, not in its legalistic term. So it doesn't mean you actually have to be a citizen of the country with the paperwork. When you do when you recruit people into a citizen assembly, maybe I should explain how that works, because that will answer the question. It's a process called sortition. And what happens when done well, and like the gold standard way of doing it is, if you're doing a national citizens assembly, you send out around 20 to 30,000 letters to 20 to 30,000 random addresses selected off the post office database. So it's not the electoral register, which is actually quite poor and excludes about 40% of people, but the post office database. So basically anybody that could receive a piece of mail could potentially get this piece of mail that invites them to take part. And that letter would say, we're having a citizen assembly and the government has commissioned it, and this is what the question is. You will get paid. That's another thing to remember, like, people are paid for their time, because you don't just want it to be people who've got plenty of money and can can like got time and money to be able to afford to do it. You pay people because they're valuable, cover their caring costs, blah, 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 all these things. It says, this is a great opportunity. If you're interested in taking part, please register. And then you go online and you register. And when you register, you have to give your demographic details. So then you've got 20,000, so 20,000 letters have gone out. Most people put it in the bin because most people assume it's a piece of junk mail and don't believe that anybody is actually asking them to take part in an important thing that will actually, have some power. But about between 1.5% and 4%, I think, of people do go, yeah, right, worth a punt, see what happens. And those hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people go register. And then there is a random selection of 100 people who meet the demographic characteristics of the country. So anybody could get that letter. It doesn't have to go to your landlord. It goes to the person that literally is behind that front door. So as long as you have somewhere to live, and yes, it does exclude homeless people. I'm not going to lie. It doesn't capture everybody. There are people who are in insecure housing who might not have the front door, but it does capture 99.9% of the country. If you got an address, it will capture you. You have an equal chance of getting that letter. So absolutely, yes, this needs to account for and include the most vulnerable in society. And the job of the people putting on the Citizens Assembly and running it is to make it as easy and as smooth a process as possible. And so we've provided computers and tech and data so you can get online. We've given we've told people when we've run these things online, like how to use Zoom, because loads of people never used Zoom before. So we're like, we're gonna sit with you and we're going to talk you through how to do this so you can take part. And we have people who have never stood up and spoken in front of people before, and we support them to be able to do that. So there's a lot of capacity building or confidence building that goes along with doing this properly.
I mean, how is there like a way for people to sign up to do something like this, or is it really just a matter of chance that you're able to be participating in something as important as this? Yeah,
it is chance, like jury services chance, exactly like you said, right? Jury system is exactly the same process, but there it's like matter of life or death potentially, or certainly life imprisonment or freedom. So these are massive decisions we trust people with. Citizens Assembly is the same. You can't sign up because what you don't want is people who are like, oh, me, I've got those things to say, I'm really interested, and I'm always going to be at that town hall meeting, and I'm always going to be the one writing to my MP. It's not those people. I mean, they might get the letter, but it's actually for people who would never, ever, ever consider themselves to consider that would be the thing they do. Those people need to be in the room because they're the ones who are never listened to.
I mean, you were mentioning the trust in government. Have there been situations in which they had a citizens assembly and this recommendation was just like, oh, thank you so much, but we're going to go in a different direction, essentially? Or is there that much more pressure on the politicians that are receiving that recommendation to go with what the assembly is essentially offering?
There are many, many, many more times when it hasn't had the impact it should have done than when it has. And that's the disappointment that I have in politicians. But then there's also the times when it's made a massive difference and things have like massively, radically changed as a result. Ireland being a fantastic example of that. But also things on local citizen assemblies on climate change, for instance, where, and I'm now desperately trying to think of some really good examples and my mind has gone blank. So I'm going to think more about some particular examples, but where things really have changed. And so we did a citizen assembly in a small local authority in the south of England. And it was about how one of their towns in their citizen assembly, in their local authority area was going to be developed over time. And they had all sorts of ideas, but like, what we're going to do. The town council, the local authority had plenty of ideas, but they said, okay, let's hear what citizens want. And citizens came up with some completely different things, at which point the town council went, yep, okay then. And they totally changed the master plan and the town has developed in an entirely different way with like less parking, more walking, more green space, more social housing, more community facilities. And they've done it. And actually, interestingly, since then, the council went, yeah, that worked. We've had this really amazing relationship with our citizens. right, let's do that then. And they've actually not formally institutionalized it into their governance procedures, but it is the way they run the council, and they basically do everything now with citizens. A place called Test Valley. They're super cool. No one's ever heard of them, but they're one of the most amazing radical councils, I think, in the UK right now.
You mentioned earlier that you're not a gamer, but since we are launching, or we have launched this game jam about citizens assemblies, what do you think about games or interactive media helping to build the public understanding of processes like citizens assemblies, getting the word out there? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I do, because it's one thing for like organizations in the democracy sector like mine to go, citizens assemblies, they're really amazing, and politicians actually, like, awareness is really high now. People know what we're talking about when we talk about citizen assemblies. But if there's pressure or calls for, like, we want to have a voice, we want to be involved in these things from people going, do you know what? It's a bit rubbish that we've got no power and like we can't change anything that happens in our local area, or we've got no voice, no one's listening. If they can go, but you know what, local councillor, you know what, government, there's this thing that we'd like you to do. Imagine that call. Imagine that being kind of like a movement of people going, yeah, we'd like that. We want that. You want democracy to work? You want to get re-elected? You probably want to be listening to us right now, and what we would like you to do is run these things. So, sorry, that's my thing. So I think anything that puts the idea of citizen assemblies and a different way of doing democracy, like, into people's minds and consciousness, how fantastic is that? Not only because hopefully it would generate a massive, well, not massive, but generate a call for that from people's, to the people who hold the power at the moment. But also so people know that there is another way of doing democracy, that there is an alternative. Because otherwise, when you've got kind of populist leaders who sound really convincing, even if it's based on like empty promises and lies, sounds really convincing, they're speaking their language, it's like, that's a really tempting alternative. And I get that. I totally understand that. So I'd much rather people called for a positive way of doing things differently.
How have you found, because the problem I've got, many people have with assemblies, is that, so like you mentioned earlier, so few people actually get to experience them, and getting to experience them is the way that the easiest way of feeling their potential, right? And whereas you Miriam, are stuck with the tough job of trying to go, hey guys, they're really great. You necessarily have to tell, not show. We as game designers, developers, whatever, we're trying to show, not tell. What have you found, so that we can go look into it more? Were there resources or tips or shortcuts? What have you found are the best ways of getting to the heart of getting across what's great about either the structures or the emotion of assemblies? Like, have you found your own sort of hacks and shortcuts to try and get there?
To explain it like in the one sentence that makes people go, yeah, that thing. No. I can do it in 20 minutes, which is too long. So there's a professor at Stanford University called Jim Fishkin who calls it democracy when the people are thinking. And I think that's really cool. I really like that. And what's the thing that Jamie Kelsey, who's involved in this, he also says it's an anti-polarization machine. I love that as well. It's like, it's a way of doing things differently that I think is great. But you're at the point that we don't talk about them enough, or they're not like in the public consciousness, is definitely a thing. And that's, I think the problem with that is when these things are run, the people who run them don't shout about it. It's like, seriously, people, communicate. You're doing this big, wonderful thing. Why are you not like having it on headlines of every local newspaper that you have? Why is it not like the first thing that you talk about? Why are you not more proud that you've done this wonderful thing? So people, even if they haven't taken part, know that people like them have taken part. Because you'd rather know that and we've done loads of polling on this, people want to know that they're peers, even if it's not them, it's people like them that have had the opportunity. That's fine. That's good enough if they know that, this thing is out there and happening.
Well, we're coming down to the end of the hour. I just want to say thank you again, Miriam, so much for taking the time to sit with us and talk about citizens assemblies a bit more in depth. yeah, I mean, it definitely is something that has started to really resonate with me since I've started to learn about them. And I hope anybody who's watching this, taking part in the jam, is also feeling that same impact to drive that initiative forward. Do you have any other additional resources for people who want to check out, particularly your website or any other Citizens Assemblies related websites? I'm also going to drop in the chat the link to not only our jam page for the Citizens Assemble jam, but also the website for One World or None, where you can find plenty of other additional resources about Citizens Assembly. So I'll do that right now.
I have resources, but not to hand, not what I can put in the chat super quickly. So maybe if I send them to you, Jess.
Yeah, of course. I can put them into the description of the videos after we've concluded this webinar. Just grabbing the itch link. But yeah, the jam has already started. It is running until the end of.
Oh, sorry, my game design sense is tinkling. Someone in the chat is just sort of coming up with ideas, and I have to respond to them.
Oh yeah, go ahead, please do. Please do.
That's really general. If I think someone here is talking about, you know, you as a role, you're a citizen, and each time you play as a different citizen with a different viewpoint. On that note, I'll bring it up in other places, but really have to think about the different roles that are in an assembly. Miriam mentioned facilitators. There are the commissioners, there are the experts who come along to try and teach people. If there's one thing I can just leave everyone on is really look at the different roles, the cast of characters in an assembly. I think they're all really rich. Like playing as a citizen is going to be a really good thing. But if there's one wish I have is that people explore different roles, like what does it mean to try and be a facilitator wrangling 100 messy humans, so all that sort of stuff. So I'll just stop there, but just wanted to add that.
Yeah, I'm not just reading at the comments, just being like completely intrigued by what people think.
Well, once again, thank you so much, Tristan, for spending the time with us as well. Miriam, I really appreciate your time. If anyone has any questions about the jam as well, you can always reach out to us at cajam@globalgamejam.org as well. And on that note, I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of their day, wherever you are. All right, take care. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
What's wrong?